In the early years of World War II, fertilizer factories were no longer making plant food. They were making explosives. Nitrates, phosphates and industrial chemicals were redirected to ammunition and bombs. That left millions of farmers across America, Europe and Asia with exhausted soil and no commercial fertilizer. Yet food production did not collapse. In many regions, harvests actually increased. That is the first mystery of this story, and honestly, it is one that modern agriculture rarely discusses. If you look at wartime farm records, extension manuals, and victory garden handbooks, you will find repeated references to one overlooked ingredient that quietly carried the burden of food production. It was not synthetic nitrogen. It was not imported phosphate. It was not chemical growth stimulant. It was living biology in the soil, deliberately cultivated and managed. That secret ingredient was active microbial life, built and fed through composted organic matter, green manure crops, and fermented plant extracts. During the war, this living system replaced factory fertilizer almost entirely. Before chemical fertilizer dominated agriculture, farmers understood soil as a living system. It was filled with bacteria, fungi, protozoa and microscopic organisms that processed nutrients and delivered them directly to plant roots. World War II forced a return to that understanding. Farmers were encouraged to compost everything, Kitchen scraps, manure, straw, weeds, leaves and crop residues were all layered up and fermented into this, nutrient-dense humus. And this compost, it wasn't just treated as waste. No, it was seen as fertilizer in its most powerful form. At the same time, fields were planted with clover, vetch, peas and beans right between the food crops. These plants, they hosted nitrogen-fixing bacteria on their roots. So instead of buying nitrogen, farmers actually grew it. And when these plants were turned into the soil, they released stored nutrients while feeding the microbes. The combination of compost and green manure, it created a biological engine underground. Bacteria converted organic matter into soluble nutrients. Mycorrhizal fungi, they extended root systems by hundreds of feet. Worms aerated the soil and distributed minerals. So, plants no longer depended on surface fertilizer. They were, in fact, connected to an underground supply network. Wartime agricultural reports documented something surprising, Crops grown in biologically active soil often outperformed chemically fertilized fields. The yields were more stable, crops resisted disease better, and even drought damage was reduced. Not to mention, flavor and nutrient density actually improved. The reason was simple, really. Chemical fertilizer feeds plants directly, but starves soil life. Biological fertilizer, on the other hand, feeds the entire ecosystem. Instead of forcing growth, it supports balanced development. A tomato grown in living soil receives nitrogen, potassium, calcium, magnesium and trace minerals in precise amounts, delivered by microbes when the plant needs them. No factory blend can match that timing, honestly. Farmers noticed that once soil biology was established, harvests increased year after year without additional inputs. One compost application could influence productivity for several seasons. The process was systematic and repeatable. A typical wartime farmer followed three main steps. First, all organic waste was collected. Nothing was discarded. Vegetable scraps, manure, straw bedding, fallen leaves and weeds were piled in layers. Carbon-rich material was alternated with nitrogen-rich material. The pile was kept moist, but not wet. It was turned every 2 weeks to oxygenate microbes. After 3 to 4 months, it became dark, crumbly humus. Second, green manure crops were rotated through every field. After harvesting wheat or corn, clover or vetch was planted immediately. It grew through fall and early spring. Before flowering, it was cut and tilled into the soil. This injected nitrogen and organic matter directly into the root zone. Third, farmers brewed fermented plant teas. Weeds, comfrey, nettle and manure were soaked in barrels of water for several weeks. The resulting liquid was diluted and poured around crops. This inoculated soil with beneficial bacteria and enzymes. Together, these steps replaced industrial fertilizer almost completely. After the Second World War, chemical factories had, enormous production capacity and no more bombs to build. They needed new markets, you see. Agriculture became the solution. Synthetic nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium were repackaged as what they called modern farming. Universities were funded to promote them, and extension programs shifted away from composting and soil biology. Even farming manuals were rewritten. Living fertilizer had one problem from a corporate perspective. It couldn't be patented, and it couldn't be sold repeatedly. It made farmers, independent. Chemical fertilizer, on the other hand, created dependency. Each season required new purchases, and soil biology slowly collapsed, making crops increasingly reliant on chemicals. Within 2 decades, most farmers no longer knew how to build living soil. You know, this wartime method still works, whether you've got a backyard garden or several acres to tend. So, begin by starting a compost system using kitchen waste leaves, grass clippings and manure if you've got some handy. Just remember to keep it aerated and moist. In about 3 months, you'll have your own biological fertilizer ready to go. Next, plant legumes such as peas, beans or clover between growing seasons. Don't harvest them, simply cut and bury them before they flower. Brew simple compost tea by soaking finished compost in water for about 24 hours, giving it a good stir every now and then. Then just pour it around the plant roots every couple of weeks. Avoid synthetic fertilizer, It will undo all that biological progress you've worked for. Within 1 season, you'll notice darker soil, stronger root systems, and honestly, healthier plants. And within 3 seasons, yields often increase dramatically. These days, modern agriculture faces rising costs, declining soil, and, unstable supply chains. Back in World War II, farmers managed to solve these very problems with biology patience and local materials. They really proved that food security does not depend on factories. It actually depends on understanding nature's systems. You know, recovering this knowledge isn't just nostalgia. It's actually practical resilience. You know, the so-called secret ingredient of farming during the Second World War was, well, never a product at all. It was actually a process. It was the deliberate rebuilding of living soil, something that made all the difference. This approach, it tripled harvests because it restored balance to the land. But honestly, it was buried over time, mainly because it threatened profit. So, if you want reliable food, healthier crops, and a bit of independence from chemical systems, this forgotten method really does deserve your attention. If you found this guide valuable, do consider subscribing to the channel for more lost wartime knowledge, traditional farming systems, and practical history that, well, still works today. And go on, share this video with someone who believes in growing food the right way.